Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you all have had a great weekend and a great rest of your week from last week. So, we just finished our third unit in class, which was talking about different ethical issues that face us today and how we might tackle those ethical issues as members of society who engage in certain forms of consumption and production and contribute to various social systems. Now we're probably going to venture into kind of a more ethereal, abstract way of understanding ethics and practicing it. That is, we're going to be transitioning into a new unit, but this unit is going to be focused around kind of existentialism. So, in philosophy, existentialism is kind of the philosophical field that has to deal with or contends with the big questions. So, why am I here? What kind of purpose do I have? Is there a God? These are kinds of some of the questions that existentialism uh, investigates. And one common feature or theme of all existentialist philosophy is that it has to deal with the human experience and what it means to be a human living on this earth during this time in this universe. So, a lot of what existentialism investigates and talks about is the human experience and looking at things specifically from a human's point of view, which of course is something that we do all the time, but trying to understand exactly what it means to be human is something that is much more complicated and specific. So, we're going to be talking about in today's lecture um, existentialism, what it means to be human broadly, and how the features of our humanity or the characteristics of our humanity ought to inform our lives if we're trying to be ethical people. So those are the themes and topics that we're going to be talking about this week and in our class next week. So this is the final unit that we're doing. More specifically, it's going to be talking about atonement and redemption and how we ought to construct society and how we ought to live if we're going to be embodying some of the values that we've looked at in this class. Namely, how are we to embody love? What does love look like? And what should we do if we find ourselves in a situation in which we've either wronged someone or if we're looking for guidance in how to set up society to embody the values that we've been talking about. So, those are the kinds of issues that we're going to be talking about in this unit. And the first reading that I assigned, and the first topic that we're going to discuss, is the kind of impact that our society has had on our ethical or unethical ways of life. So, I assigned for you today uh, an excerpt from Eric Fromm's book, The Art of Loving. And so we're going to be talking about how love shows up or fails to show up in contemporary Western society, and how society has conditioned us in more than a few ways to uh, act in ways that are not extremely loving to one another. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. So, uh, the piece that I assigned was, I believe it was chapter 3 of Fromm's book, in which he talks about the disintegration of love in contemporary Western society. If you haven't already listened or watched the video that goes along with this lecture, please do that first by visiting the lecture notes, and then think about what that song has to do with the topic of love in contemporary society that I'm going to discuss today. So again, we're looking at a philosopher named Erich Fromm. He was born in 1900 and died in 1980. Fromm lived an interesting life. He was actually a German Jew who fled the Nazis and came to the United States. And he became, during his life, a pretty well-known philosopher. He looked a lot at psychoanalysis and the unconscious mind. And he also did some sociological work about kind of how humans interact in society and how they see themselves and other people as members of society. So some of his famous ideas are these analyses of contemporary society, as well as his work in psychoanalysis and on myths and legends, kind of the same stuff Jung was talking about, and his work in political theory. But today, specifically, again, we're going to be talking about what his theory of love is and how love shows up or fails to show up in today's society. So, before we get into the specifics of the chapter that I had you read for today, I kind of like to go over some background information of what Fromm was doing in the preceding chapters of this book that led him to say the stuff that he was saying in this chapter. So, basically, the kind of work and theory that Fromm has been working off of in the preceding chapters has been something like this. He says that love is an art, and it's something that needs to be practiced if we're going to become good at it. He distinguishes between two different experiences of love that we feel in contemporary society. There's falling in love, which he associates with those lovey-dovey feelings and those butterflies that you get when you look at your partner and stuff like that, and all the ooey-gooey feelings that you have for them. Falling in love and those feelings are one thing, but what he calls standing in love or loving another person is a different thing entirely. What that amounts to is committing oneself to someone else and trying to safeguard their interests and their desires. This kind of view of love is really reminiscent of kind of what we looked at in Held's Ethics of Care, as well as love as theory and practice that we looked at in the Bell Hooks piece and the Irigaray piece. So he's going to be working off of similar views of what love is and what love ought to be. Fromm thinks that kind of the source of the vast majority of stress and guilt and anxiety that we feel in our lives is because we're aware of the ways in which we are separate from one another. He says awareness of human separateness is the source of all the anxiety, guilt, and shame that we experience during our lives. He says, quote, "Man, of all ages and cultures, is confronted with the solution of one and the same question. The question of how to overcome separateness, how to achieve union, how to transcend one's own individual life and find at-one-ment or atonement." I kind of like his way of breaking this up. This idea that finding atonement for one's past misdeeds or sins amounts to overcoming the separateness that kind of saturates how we treat and interact with others and how we see ourselves. Fromm is working under the assumption that kind of what we're trying to do in life broadly is to achieve union with other people and overcome this fundamental separateness that we feel. And there are several different ways that we try to do this that he breaks down in the preceding chapters of the reading that I had you do for today. One way we try to achieve union with other people and overcome separateness is by trying to achieve orgiastic states. And these are states that are brought on by having sex or doing drugs or experience certain climaxes. These orgiastic states, humans often try to chase after because they think this is going to bring them some sort of fulfillment. Of course, this isn't going to bring them permanent fulfillment and satisfaction, which is why when we do feel something positive come about by our practice of engaging in sex with another person or doing drugs, that we always kind of end up coming back for more. So this way is not a way of actually overcoming the separateness that we feel. We also try to achieve union and overcome this separateness by experiencing or pursuing conformity with the group to which we belong or the groups to which we belong. But of course, This way is not going to be a permanent solution to overcoming our anxiety or separateness either, because conformity with the group is not something that we're ever going to be completely happy or fulfilled about, right? We may try to be like other people, we may try to fit in with their narratives and ways of seeing and understanding the world, but insofar as we are at bottom different than others, um, that way of trying to achieve union and overcome separateness isn't going to be a, a long lasting solution either. Because we are different than other people and we do see things differently and want different things. So we're not going to be able to achieve this existential separateness, or we're not going to be able to eradicate that by just conforming with our social group. Similarly, we're not going to be able to overcome our separateness by engaging in mere creative activity, like making music or making art or, making collages or doing photography or anything like this. Creative activity can oftentimes be a good way of overcoming our separateness and trying to achieve union with the human experience or with the world. But this is also not a permanent solution. The only permanent solution Fromm sees to overcoming the separateness that we feel and the anxiety and the guilt and the shame that we feel is by loving someone in the correct way. What that amounts to exactly, we'll get to in the lecture on Wednesday. But just note that at the outset, Fromm thinks that love is the only satisfactory answer to the fundamental question of human existence, which is how do I become who I'm meant to be, and how do I achieve personal fulfillment in this life? He says, mature love is union under the condition of preserving one's integrity, one's individuality. Love is an active power in man, a power which breaks through the walls which separate man from his fellow men, which unites him with others. Love makes him overcome the sense of isolation and separateness, not orgiastic states or creative activity or conformity. Yet love permits him to be himself, to retain his integrity. In love, the paradox occurs that two beings become one and yet remain two. So his idea of what love is he thinks love is the solution to human separateness, and it is through the practice of love that we get to experience a union with someone else while remaining our own person and maintaining our own sense of integrity and individuality. So broadly, what Fromm is going to say is that love is an activity. It's something that we do. It's not something that we merely feel. Loving someone doesn't mean feeling good about them. It means actually doing stuff for them and committing to them in some sense. And he's going to characterize love as a giving of one person to another. Uh, he says love is a giving of all. Uh, love is a giving of all expressions and manifestations of that which is alive in the person that is doing the loving. So what love actually is it's not a desire to be loved. It's not having certain feelings necessarily in a relationship. What love is a productive activity. It empowers the other person, and it is a giving, not a taking, fundamentally. And so these are kind of the presuppositions and ideas about love that Fromm relies on in this chapter when he's going to talk about how love has disintegrated in contemporary Western society. And the locus or the cause of this, he's ultimately going to pin on capitalism, which we'll get into here in just a moment. Love for Fromm ultimately is going to require a certain amount of care for the other person, a certain amount of responsibility, respect, and a certain knowledge of them. Though we'll never be able to completely understand the other person, we need to understand kind of how they see the world and how they work and interact with the world broadly if we're going to be giving and respectful and caring to them. So, now we can finally talk about the actual reading that I assigned for today, which was this chapter about love and its disintegration in Western contemporary society. The one thing that Fromm notes at the outset is that love is something that flows from one's character. And since our characters are influenced by the society and culture in which we were born and raised, our capacity for love is also going to be influenced by our society and culture. So if we're trying to understand whether or not we're going to be able to love people appropriately, we need to look at the social conditions under which we live. What Fromm is going to ultimately conclude and argue for in this chapter is that the way contemporary Western society is set up is it is not conducive to the development of love or the cultivation of characters that are going to be able to do authentic, appropriate loving. He's going to say various forms of pseudo love exist in our society, but these forms are not true love. And it is very often to engage in true, authentic love in the society in which we find ourselves today, for example, in the United States. And he's going to motivate this argument by kind of breaking down the features of society that we see and experience today. Features that are tied to capitalistic society. One of the arguments that he's going to make is that one reason why it's very difficult for us to authentically and truly love other people in society is because our society is structured around this economic system of capitalism. What capitalism does, he says, is it teaches us to value things over people, to value capital over people and the accumulation of capital and property and wealth. He's going to say that capitalism engenders us to value products and capital over labor and the laborers themselves. He also says that concentration of capital that we have experienced historically, this concentration of capital into the hands of only a few people or corporations has pushed individuals into forming various bureaucratic structures to safeguard their interests. These kinds of bureaucratic structures are like corporations and labor unions and things like this. What the capitalistic machine, Fromm says, has basically done is it's pushed us into forming these structures that have basically increased our dependency on our fellow man and on one another. We're not actually promoting individuality by engaging in capitalist policy and by running society in a capitalist way. We are rather setting up structures to deal with our problems for us and that increase our dependency on these processes and structures for our very survival. He says, modern capitalism needs men who cooperate smoothly and in large numbers, who want to consume more and more and whose tastes are standardized and can be easily influenced and anticipated by the market. Capitalism needs men who feel free and independent, not subject to any authority or principle or conscience, yet willing to be commanded, to do what is expected of them, to fit into the social machine without friction, who can be guided without force, led without leaders, prompted without aim, except the one aim to make good, to be on the move, to function, to go ahead. So what Fromm sees capitalism doing is kind of engendering in us a way of life that is rather conformist, that is rather unfree, but kind of gives us the illusion that we're free and that we're actually able to do what we want. Although we're actually dependent on these systems in really important ways that actually shows us that we're not actually free. So this kind of idea is similar to what we saw in the racial contract that prescribed for its individuals an inverted epistemology. Fromm is kind of saying something similar here. The way society, capitalist society operates now is that it kind of leads people to think that they are free, autonomous, rational individuals, but it engenders them uh, to be homogenous in what they value and how they treat one another and how they set up their lives so that society can continue to function smoothly and not really foster creative expression or individuality. Because we have set up our society in ways that are deeply capitalistic, Fromm says that has had a lot of impact on us as a people. Uh, it's had many negative impacts on us as a society. Because we've set up our society capitalistically, everything has become commodified, according to Fromm, including people, their experiences, and relationships. He says, capitalism has transformed us into a commodity, our life forces therefore being treated as an investment which must bring us the maximum profit obtainable under market conditions. So, what we see capitalism do is that it threatens to reduce all domains and areas of life to commodification. What it also teaches us to do is it teaches us to treat everything around us as commodities too. So, this phone, you know, going on certain trips, having certain experiences. These are all things that can be bought if we have the wealth, if we have the necessary capital uh, to buy these things. So it threatens to treat a lot of objects in society as things that can be consumed and as things that we can kind of put energy and money into and get a kickback. Fromm also says that another effect of capitalism is that it has homogenized culture and society. What this means is that it kind of squashes creative freedom and individuality. In order for the market to function smoothly, in order for society to function smoothly, everybody roughly has to be on the same social and cultural page. So, what this does ultimately is it treats us all kind of the same and it wants us to be the same as everybody else so that things can kind of go on functioning as they always have. He says, human relations in a capitalist society are essentially those of alienated automatons or machines, each each basing his security on staying close to the herd and not being different in thought, feeling, or action to other people. So the only way that we can get our economy and society to function is that if everybody basically has the same thoughts, beliefs, and understandings of the world. This is what capitalism engenders in us from things. On account of this privileging of capitalism and setting up our society in capitalistic ways, we have become alienated with respect to ourselves and others. He says, on account of all this, everybody remains utterly alone, pervaded by the deep sense of insecurity, anxiety, and guilt, which always results when human separateness cannot be overcome. Because we have been taught to become good workers and just put in the hard work, and that's what's going to get us to have a fulfilling life, we don't actually uh, overcome this human separateness that we feel deep within our being. He says that by becoming good workers and by just becoming cogs in the machine, we're not actually taught to introspect and understand what it is that we feel and what we're lacking. We are taught rather to seek fulfillment by our engagement in the economic machine, which, of course, is not going to get us the fulfillment and happiness that we actually want out of society and out of human life. Consequently, Capitalism teaches us that happiness is to be found in consumption, amusement, or escape from reality. And I think he's got a wonderful quote on this. He says, "Man's happiness today consists in having fun. Having fun lies in the satisfaction of consuming and taking in commodities, sights, food, drinks, cigarettes, people, lectures, books, and movies. All are consumed and swallowed. The world is one great object for our appetite, a big apple, a big bottle, a big breast. We are the sucklers, the eternally expectant ones, the hopeful ones, and the eternally disappointed ones. Our character is geared to exchange and to receive, to barter and to consume. Everything, spiritual as well as material objects, becomes an object of exchange and consumption." So what Fromm is getting at here is that the way we have organized contemporary society, this by privileging and setting up capitalistic structures, what this has done for us is it has taught us to value capital and wealth above everything else. And it has taught us that we're only able to achieve happiness and fulfillment by being a good worker and by being a good laborer and by accruing a certain amount of wealth for ourselves. But, of course, it doesn't have to be this way, right? And this way of going about and interacting with the world, Fromm says, is not ultimately going to bring us fulfillment or happiness at all. Being a good worker, uh, obtaining a certain amount of property or wealth isn't going to get us to be happy with ourselves at the end of the day, or to get us to feel like we are whole, or overcome that human separateness that we feel with respect to everybody else around us and with ourselves. In these ways, capitalism has affected how society views itself and views its role in the world and what it ought to do if it's going to be a good, productive member of society. Unsurprisingly, capitalism has affected how we view love and relationships, not just how we view economics or social policy generally. What capitalism has done, according to Fromm, is it's miseducated us about what love is. Love is not sexual satisfaction, he says. Love is not just having good sex with someone else. That's not what love is, according to Fromm, even though we're taught to think that we are really killing it at life if we're just having good sex. Fromm's like, no, that's not what love is, and uh, that's not going to get you feeling whole or fulfilled at the end of your life. Similarly, love is not good teamwork with another person. We hear this idea a lot in contemporary relationships that if you want to make a relationship work, if you want to make love work, you got to form a good team and you got to cooperate well with one another. Fromm's like, that's not what love is. Learning to work well with another person is not the same as love. And we should not mistake good teamwork for a good, loving relationship. Similarly, love is not idolizing your partner or idolizing the object of your love. It's not placing your partner on a pedestal and praising them like a god or thinking that you are so much more lowly with respect to them. No, that's not what love is. Treating someone like an idol or like a god and putting them on a pedestal is not the same as loving them. Oftentimes, that kind of behavior can lead to us not loving them or treating them in ways that are unloving, right? So simply idolizing another person or putting them on a pedestal is not the same as love either. And finally, Fromm wants us to get rid of the idea that love means there is going to be absence of conflict in relationships. That is not what love is. Just because there's conflict in relationships doesn't mean that you don't love one another and doesn't mean that you don't love one another authentically, right? Arguments and disagreements are natural in relationships because we obviously all have different viewpoints and understandings of the world. So absence of conflict is not the same as love. Just because you're not having arguments in your relationship And just because you're not fighting with your partner doesn't mean you actually love them truly, authentically. These views of love are kind of what we have been educated to think that love is, but they're all mistaken ultimately, and they're not going to help us achieve fulfillment in our lives. We have also been taught to believe that kind of what relationships are personality exchanges, he calls them. I look at your personality and I kind of conceptualize it and I look at the different ways that it would mesh well with mine, and I put my personality on display for you to look at too. And if we think that our personalities will work together well, we think that's what a relationship ought to be. A relationship ought to be like uh, a situation in which your personality meshes up well with the other person. That's not exactly what love is either, right? Loving another person doesn't mean like necessarily just molding your personality to fit them or to give them all the time exactly what they want. That's not what love is at the end of the day. Love is something more basic and fundamental. It's not simply a personality exchange that he calls it. Basically, what Fromm is trying to get us to understand is that how we love and how we see love is way out of whack. And it's not the way that it should be in contemporary Western society. He thinks that we have become unable to love ourselves and other people and God ultimately because we don't really understand ourselves or others or God. In this chapter, he talks a lot about trauma and how trauma in children affects how they treat and view relationships in the future. So much of kind of what's going on in society from things are the result of childhood traumatic experiences and just this miseducation about love. And this miseducation about love uh, comes in large part from viewing society primarily through a capitalist or economic lens. This idea that we should always be looking for a fair trade or a fair deal, or that what love is like a fair exchange of resources. Fromm's like, you got to get that out of your head. That's not what love is. That's not what your relationships should be. They should be something uh, more pure in spirit. They should be something that is more active, that is committed to the other person's interests and desires and meets their needs and cares for them. This view of love that we have and the way that we're carrying out love now is not actually true, authentic love. And if we're going to basically have better relationships and if we're going to find fulfillment in this life, we need to change how we view and how we see love in the first place. Which brings us to ethics. How is all of this related to ethics? Well, kind of the idea that I opened the class with was, if we're going to lead ethical lives, that needs to uh, we need to operate from a space of love and care for other people, and that's what this has to do with ethics. If Fromm is right, if the answer to the problem of human existence is love, then we ought to expect that if we're going to lead ethical lives, love has to be an integral component in that. And manifesting and embodying true, authentic love is what's going to get us to lead ethical lives with ourselves and with other people. So, as we move forward through this final unit, think about the ways in which uh, you think it means to embody love and compare that to, what you've been taught growing up, what the media teaches you about what love is, and what Fromm is trying to teach you about what love is here. Because at the end of the day, you need to think about this stuff for yourself, and you need to come to terms with what you think love is and make up your mind about that before you can start actually treating people the right way or living authentically in the ways that Fromm would like us to live. So, think about love. Think about his claim, that love has by and large disintegrated in Western society. Do you agree with that? Do you think he's right? Do you think he's wrong? Do you think that we're kind of miseducated about love nowadays? I'm really curious to see what y'all think and have to say about this. So post in the discussion boards, have discussions with your fellow classmates, and I will see you on Wednesday for the follow-up lecture that'll kind of finish this book off to talk about how to put love into practice and what it means to practice the art of loving. So until then, have a good week, and I will see you on Wednesday. Okay, have a great day, guys. Bye.